After a near endless reveal, stretching a full and breathless 20 minutes, she finally unwrapped the package. Inside was, drumroll please, not a lot. Trump made a ton of dough that year. He also paid a ton of taxes. Indeed, he paid at a higher rate than President Obama last year, and at nearly twice the rate that socialist plutocrat Bernie Sanders somehow got away with. Find his accountant, please, quick. I need his number. There was no scandal here, at least one involving Trump. But that doesn't mean there was no scandal at MSNBC. Indeed, there is. And as it happens, we revealed it at almost the precise moment they pulled their nothing burger off the grill. Remember the leak of the Access Hollywood tape in October, 2 days before the presidential debate? The one that wound up dominating the campaign more than any other single issue that year? Well, it turns out the whole thing was a setup devised by NBC executives in an effort to derail the Trump campaign. As we reported, that tape, which was NBC property, shot by NBC cameramen for an NBC show on NBC property, was stealthily leaked to a Washington Post reporter. Why is that? Well, it didn't happen by accident. According to our sources at the network, NBC News Division head Andrew Lack knew about it. So did Today Show anchor Matt Lauer. The company's motive was pretty straightforward: keep Trump from becoming president. Well, it didn't work, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that one of the biggest news networks in the world took an active side in a closely fought political race and then lied about it repeatedly. They posed as journalists, but they acted like political hacks. Well, we've asked NBC to explain, but they have, weirdly, refused comment. Perhaps they're too busy concocting a new Putin-Center conspiracy theory to explain how, despite their fervent efforts, Hillary Clinton lost the race anyway. Joining us now from New York City is radio show host Tammy Bruce. Hey, Tammy.
Hey, Tucker. Nice to be on.
Well, what I find odd is that news organizations are, by definition, committed to openness. So if you say to a news organization, hey, we think you've done something dishonest, something stealthy and feline, and then lied about it, don't they have an obligation to at least respond and explain?
Well, they would if they held those same standards. And, of course, you do. The problem is to not project onto these other entities. It's clear that some still hold those standards and others do not. With NBC, the problem is clear. And you saw it not just with the Access Hollywood tape, which in many ways backfired. Clearly, the only person harmed was Billy Bush. He lost his job. This was a dynamic where originally people thought, well, it had to have been a rogue staffer, whereas in fact, look, it was, as you mentioned, people in the NBC News division. The man, by the way, who was running the Today Show at the time, just last month was promoted to heading up NBC News in its entirety, so they seem to have liked what it was that transpired somehow. And then the Rachel Maddow debacle. And what happens is there's a desperation to, in fact, since this was personal, they had an interest in influencing the election. And when you get desperate and suddenly news is not the issue or genuine critique is not the issue, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to know where to stop. And your judgment in and of itself is clouded. And that is what's, of course, informing this entire framework for at least that one network, if not others.
Well, right, because they put their political aims above their job as purveyors of news. It was a real story. It was a real tape. You could debate, whether or not Trump knew he was on camera or whatever, but it was a real thing. And they didn't run it on their own network. They sent it to a competitor, the Washington Post, because they wanted the outcome to be the same, and they didn't want to be tied to what was clearly a partisan act.
Yes, and there was some debate even then, as I've read in some reports, that there was, California laws about taping people are different than other states, and it would have been risky, and they wanted to maybe take out Billy Bush's comments, and it got all messy, and it was just easier to move it to another friendly outlet that would, in fact, move it. This is when I was with Now and on the Left, when I was working with media, this is how it worked. If you couldn't find an outlet that would handle something first, you would get it to another outlet that then would do it, and then everyone else would pick it up from there. And this is the nature of collusion. It's been going on for quite some time. And so for NBC, and this is, of course, a message for everyone, is that you can do ultimately whatever you want. You can see your own desperation, but it will backfire. You can't lie to your own audience and take them for granted, as Ms. Maddow did and as the Today Show does, and expect them to remain loyal to you.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, because look, you can have opinions. I've got a ton of them. I made a living on my opinions. I think that's legitimate. What you can't do is lie.
Exactly.
You're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to say something is true when you know it's not. You can also make mistakes, which I've done many times.
Yes.
But you can't do it intentionally. And by the way, nobody asked them about this. They never apparently did an internal investigation, or at least never announced the results of it. And no other news organizations organization rather said, how'd this tape get to the Washington Post? I don't remember any questions about that.
Exactly, and this is when an audience, you've got a diverse audience, or even if you've got an audience that agrees with you politically, there is still an expectation of some level of transparency.
Yes.
They want to believe that, in fact, you might not even agree with what's being said, or like you said, if it's maybe even just opinion, but the moment you feel that you're being taken along kind of a sideshow, and you've got some snake oil salesmen, and you're being taken for granted, and what Ms. Maddow did, which is draw her audience along. The only person that was exposed that night, of course, was Rachel Maddow, and the only people that were taken advantage of that night was her audience. And for NBC as an entity, you can see it's infected every network, and I think it's probably infected the nature of their on-air talent in general. Desperation for ratings, desperation to achieve their goal, which in this case is not information to impart, but to harm the President of the United States.
I think that's right. I mean, how much better would it have been if, they said, look, we thought he paid no taxes, he paid 25%. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I would have watched it, but instead, you got to hype it to the point of dishonesty.
Exactly.
Tammy, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.